We are live.
Hello, I'm Dr. Shelli Ann Garland, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Carol Ann O'Sheeran. We're both lecturers in the School of Education at Hibernia College. Thanks for your interest in our presentation. Our talk will last approximately 25 to 30 minutes. Our discussion centers around content from our forthcoming publication on learner voice, social justice, and a UDL approach to teaching, learning, and it's entitled Every Little Voice Matters, Learner Voice, Social Justice, and a UDL approach to teaching and learning. It's right here up in the corner of our screens. I will kick off our conversation by framing our discussion from a sociological perspective about why learner voice is critical for a socially just and equitable education in Ireland. Carol Ann will follow on with a conversation about doing things right and doing the right things, the technicist versus the creative practitioner. We also have a Padlet for you, and it'll be open for further discussion. I'll put that link in the chat box for you, and we'll also provide you with a context slide at the end of our discussion that contains our contact information as well as the link to the Padlet. So let's begin, shall we? Schaefer 2020 defines sociology as simply the scientific study of social behavior and human groups. It focuses on social relationships and how those relationships influence people's behavior and how societies, through those relationships, develop and change. I'd also like you to engage your sociological imagination today. Your sociological imagination is simply a particular type of critical thinking that invites you to try and think about yourself and your awareness of the relationship between yourself and other individuals and your interaction with the wider society. But think of yourself as an outsider and think the way an outsider might think, rather than just from your own perspective, experiences, and cultural biases. So let me see if I can further set the stage for our discussion today. Do you know the story of Horton Hears a Who by Dr. Seuss? It's a story of a kind-hearted elephant named Horton who lives in the jungle of Newell. So Horton is a really happy, easygoing guy who enjoys all the benefits of life of being a citizen in the jungle of Newell. But unlike many of his fellow jungle dwellers, he's a very intuitive and open kind of an open kind of elephant. He's really in touch with his sociological imagination, let's say. So when he hears a tiny voice calling out to him, he doesn't freak out or ignore it. He actually investigates. He listens and searches and finds the tiny world of the Who's on a speck of dust, a whole city of little Who's, who are very different from the people in the jungle. He can't really see them, but his big ears come in handy and he can certainly hear them. The problem is that the other citizens in the jungle of Newell cannot hear the Who's, and frankly, they're not bothered by the possibility that they even exist. Horton is mocked and threatened by the others in his jungle world for believing in and caring for those people in the other world. But that doesn't stop Horton. He works tirelessly to advocate for the little Who's and bring to light the importance of their world and the idea that listening to difference and working together to protect the right of voice can be transformative for everyone. He goes on to say, we've got to make noises in greater amounts. So open your mouth, lads, for every voice counts. So why do I start with this story? Because Horton is a lesson in social justice and the audacious possibility that if we respect and listen, every little voice counts. There's a significant disconnect between theory and practice in teacher education, and Carol Ann's going to discuss this in more detail with you in just a few minutes. What I want to discuss further is the issue of equity and equality and the concepts of horizontal and vertical equity. The barriers to equitable education can affect groups based on race, gender, and many other factors. The issues are not only who is being targeted, but also how we try to resolve them. In terms of equity versus equality in the classroom, most schools focus on horizontal equity. Catapano, 2013, defines horizontal equity in education as treating people who are already assumed equal in the same way. Horizontal equity is only useful in homogeneous schools where each person really is given the same opportunities in life. But in most schools, students come from a variety of backgrounds, some more privileged than others. For this reason, educators should focus on vertical equity, which assumes that students have different needs and provides individual resources based on these needs. UDL is based on this design idea. Social justice and an equitable education is for everyone. Basically, a social justice framework is a way of seeing and acting aimed at resisting unfairness and inequity while enhancing freedom and possibility for all. Schools often unconsciously reproduce rather than remedy the patterns of social exclusion and oppression seen within a larger society. A social justice framework in education presents a pathway to make sure that we're all seen as human beings and that we're all equitably treated. We need to educate teachers to think about pushing past the superficial treatments of culture and get to the depth of students' identity and successful learning, and to consider Adams' 2007 argument that how we teach is distinct from what we teach. We need to set extremely high expectations for every student's success and maintaining that at all costs. Having a real understanding of what works best for each individual to acquire the highest standard of education, regardless of their race, class, ethnicity, immigrant status, socioeconomic status, or ability. Teaching from a socially just perspective is simply a commitment to challenging social, cultural, and economic inequalities imposed on individuals arising from any gap in the distribution of power, resources, and privilege. Unfortunately, making educators conform to a strict set of guidelines sets the expectation that each class fits a prefab curriculum, when in reality, each and every class and individual student learns uniquely different. Social justice demands equity for all students, not equality, but equity. Equality is like giving every student the same thing. It's like giving everybody a size 38 pair of shoes and expecting them to fit. Equitable education works when teachers are empowered with a sociological imagination and mindset from the very beginning of their training to understand and incorporate students' backgrounds and experiences as strengths rather than view them as hurdles to overcome. In Ireland, the need for educators, now more than ever, to effect change in education is critical. A recent Irish Times report in 2019 on class and disadvantage in education printed what we have all experienced in the last decade or so. Ireland is more ethnically and socially diverse today than it's ever been. Schools with the highest need for English learners curriculum don't have an adequate number of qualified teachers or school leaders. They go on to state that the bottom line is that there are gaps in the educational system that are tracked and measured disproportionately. These inherent gaps are satisfied for students with wealthy families who have an excess of out-of-school resources, but remain for students who come from poor families. In 2015, the Department of Education and Skills, the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, and Corla Nanog initiated the National Strategy on Children and Young People's Participation in Decision-Making 2015 to 2020. They were interested in ensuring that students in Ireland have a voice and an input in decisions that affect their lives, such as education. They produced a very informative report called So How Was School Today? Report of Survey on How Young People Are Taught and How They Learn. And it validates the importance of student voice in education reform. Divine 2017 states, government policy is clear that children and young people should have a say in matters that directly affect them and that they should be empowered to express their views. But the findings from the survey and report highlight the lack of voice that young people have in school, and that they most certainly believe that they should have more say. The report confirms that gender is an issue in relation to the level of stress in school, and that exam stress is a big factor for student well-being as well as how teachers teach. The survey exposes the need for further research on teacher influence and attitudes towards students and the effect that these biases have on student well-being and attitudes towards school themselves. The survey also revealed that as young people move from the primary level through the secondary level, they become less positive about their attitudes of school. They suggest that further research is needed on kinds of learning methods that challenge and stimulate students and that encourage students to be actively involved. The benefits of such methods need to be explored so that the relationships between teachers and students are based on trust and respect. And Carol Ann will be discussing some of those methods with you very soon. Finally, their report indicates a need for further research to explore how teaching and learning in schools is influenced by social class and ethnicity, and if this differs for boys and girls and from one kind of school to another. Educators are responsible for creating meaningful change, and social justice is a mindset. And again, actively using your sociological imagination. The goal is that as a student teacher, you learn to implement it and not recite it for a test, just to get through it. A social justice framework needs to be incorporated into both initial teacher education and CPD for educators and administrators for a more equitable, inclusive, and holistic learning environment that incorporates the powerful tool of allowing learner voice to direct us in what they need for successful learning. By learning in a social justice oriented setting, educational leaders go on to impart this pedagogy to the school systems that they serve. A classroom practicing social justice by the teacher with the learner will encourage 1, active contributions from the students in the class and in real life, societal and community connections between students and teachers. 2, implementing an actionable and measurable curricula so that you can track improvement. And 3, constant discourse and comfortability with dissent, tension, and inviting those uncomfortable conversations in a safe space and with a sociological imagination. Bell 2019 says, a social justice classroom is one that is critical in nature. Thus, we should be constantly encouraging students to question the world around them, as well as the students that they attend, the schools that they attend, excuse me. We've got to make noises in greater amounts. So open your mouth, lads, for every voice counts. Carol Ann?
Thanks, Shelli. Today I'm going to discuss, as Shelli mentioned to you earlier on there, teaching for quality inclusive experiences. In particular, I'm going to present the role of the teacher in thinking, planning, and acting inclusively. So let's think about inclusion and what it means to us. In a recent audio boom, Professor Shevlin said, "Make no assumptions." He asks us to look at the intention of inclusion, the impetus, what motivates us to include? What's the push to ensure that all children get an opportunity to learn together? And how is policy part of this organic nature of inclusion? What is the direction of our schools, and what is the direction of inclusion in our schools? He said there is still outliers, people who do not fit. So where are they? Who are they? And are you looking for and listening to those who's? He said every child belongs, but only certain kids matter. Imagine that in 2021, we hear the professor of inclusion say, only certain kids matter in our system. I want to talk about UD and inclusive education. But before I can talk to this, I have to present the who's, the little voices in my head, and how they got there and who they represent. I hold in my heart, my hand, and my head the voices of all the children and the families I have worked with. I look for who's in my community and my practice, but this does not make me inclusive. Reflection helps me to action inclusion. Paulo Freire said, the greatest humanistic and historical task of the oppressed is to liberate themselves and their oppressors as well. So the question I ask you today is, has your concept of inclusion become your oppressor? Have you fallen into an ethical sinkhole? Are you doing the right thing or doing things right? The research is strong. Pedagogy matters to child outcomes. I argue that we are all pedagogues in the system that is a community for education. Campbell Barr 2017 said, pedagogy represents a complex interaction between knowledge, skills, and attitudes, shaped by knowledge on child development that requires the skills to provide appropriate environments in a way that is inclusive and accepting of diversification. Alexander's 2004 definition is, in essence, the who of decision making and how they justify what they do to make change happen. So the past, the present, and the future in teaching is about more than offering a just experience for our children. We can teach teachers to have attitudes, but we can challenge them to reflect critically on their own values. IT has to bring teachers on a journey of thinking about inclusion. We have the traditional to remember, and we have to keep our teachers moving forward. The present teachers are also extremely important in our system. We have to bring contemporary approaches to them. We have to remind them of child-led emergent curriculum. Continuous learning matters for inclusion. I argue that the present also involves the future. Teachers have to be change agents, and that means having the freedom within the system to be creative, liberating the self from that which oppresses. In reflection and participation, we ask, how do we know, acknowledge, and attend to that which oppresses us in our actions? But questioning is not enough. Education should lead praxis, which is reflective participation. If systems present policy as fait accompli, then we produce technologies of power. Teachers are not technologists. Teachers are creative practitioners. There's a growing emphasis on co-creating curriculum and unpacking knowledge to enable it to be actioned. The concept of inclusion has to be actioned upon, not just presumed to be there and working. The important argument here is what teachers bring to the task of thinking, acting, and planning inclusively. I argue that you should liberate yourself from spending time looking for inclusive education, because you will never find it. Why? Because inclusive education is unfinished business, the unfinished business of the education system. So start thinking, acting, and planning inclusively. Lingard and Mills, 2007, said, "Do not fall into the trap that teachers and pedagogies are all that matter in respect to school and social justice. Look beyond." I'm asking you to seek the voices of the who's, because every little voice matters. We need a wake-up call, and looking to Slee 2019 is important here. He said, perhaps it is naive, but I had accepted belonging as a conceptual and practical precondition or element of community and inclusion. Ergo, I had assumed that inclusive education embraced a commitment to dismantling exclusions that formed the foundations for the oppression of vulnerable individuals and population cohorts. We know that belonging isn't good enough. It doesn't mean participation. It doesn't mean inclusion. A truth is obvious, so inclusive practice has not evolved. Why? Ricks, Hall, Nind, and Sheehy, 2009 said, Research findings in inclusive education is not relevant to the mainstream class teacher. Why is this? Because it's not speaking the same language. Research needs to provide a frame for teachers to build possibilities on. It needs to draw them in. It also needs to reach beyond teachers and into communities. As a teacher educator, I ask teachers to look at their role in the wider community of the school, and that the task for teachers is to actively look at their own role in a system of provision. The European Agency for Special Needs in Education holds the ultimate vision for inclusive education systems is to ensure that all learners of any age are provided with meaningful, high-quality educational opportunities in their local community, alongside their friends and their peers. Inclusion is everybody's business. We've heard Patricia McCarthy say that, and Peter Mittler before her in 2008. But it is particularly important that the teacher, in planning for learning, plans inclusively. A universal design approach and a differentiated curriculum can benefit all learners in the classroom. When I am teaching student teachers, I ask them to explore UD and to critique it to form an opinion, an attitude that values inclusion as possible. Dalpit in 2006 said, when teachers are committed to teaching all students, and when they understand that through their teaching, change can occur, then the chance for transformation is great. So teachers, think about this. What are the multiple means of engagement that we might offer our learners? Consider, why do pupils need to engage in the content that we are planning for them? Are we listening to the content that they want to have? What motivates them to learn? What are they telling you about their motivations? When do they engage well with lessons? Consider what worked well for all the learners and what didn't go as well as that you expected or that they didn't expect. Remember, we discussed executive function lots of times in our teaching and learning. But one of the elements of executive function is focus. In planning for learning, how will you ensure learners can maintain and sustain focus? Will they be motivated to attend to active listening and responding? How long can they maintain this attention? This is really about their ability and how they tell you they want to focus. What multiple means of presentation are you thinking about when you're planning curriculum? Remember the methodologies that are espoused in our curriculum. Active learning, talk and discussion, cooperative and collaborative learning, problem solving, skills through content, use of the environment. Are we doing everything we can to bring a variety of methodologies to our practice and to our curriculum design? The traditional and the constructive approaches of teaching and learning are both important. We need to know when to use direct instruction. We need to know how to use it. We need to think about direct instruction in schedules, in pace of lesson, in the structure of the day. We need to think about the gradual release of responsibility model by Fisher and Frey, 2014. We need to think about constructivism as personal construction of meaning through experience. What means of expression will we offer the children? And what are they offering you that maybe you're not listening to? How many different opportunities will our learners have to demonstrate that they are growing in understanding, in comprehending, in applying what they know to real life action? As a teacher educator, I have to help my student teachers find meaning to the concept of inclusion. And that means I have to teach them to engage in in-flight thinking, in-flight acting and in-flight planning. They have to learn to listen to the who's, and they action inclusion. They have to learn to act and react to ensure greater participation. So where are your who's and are you listening? So to really bring inclusion on a journey, Shelli and I ask you to call a big meeting, get everyone out, make every who holler, make every who shout. Thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you so much, Carol Ann, for that. And, I think that we've really brought up some important conversations that need to be had around these important critical issues. And so what I hope, that you take away from this are some thinking points. And Carol Ann and I have come up with some questions again on the Padlet that I'm going to share with you in just a minute. And they ask you some questions like to really think and reflect about what does a socially just education system look like in the Irish context? Are there examples that you're aware of that might contribute to a model for marrying educational policymaking with classroom practice? And another question that Carol Ann has posed is, has your concept of inclusion become your own oppressor? Have you fallen into an ethical sinkhole? Are you doing the right thing or doing things right? And we'd really like you to engage with the Padlet that we have for you. It's open and available. You can click in and out of it anytime. And we hope that it becomes a continual dialogue as we continue on our research journey and on our writing journey, along these issues of how every little voice matters. So I'm going to share the screen with you now. Just give me 2 seconds here. Let me just put it really quickly into a slide for you, just so that it's nice and big. And what I wanted you to just see there is, again, the title of our forthcoming publication is there at the top in red. And then the Padlet, I've put it into the chat. So it's also available on the transcript that we'll have available for you. And it's also a clickable link on a PDF that will be available for you as well. Or if you've got a QR code reader, just scan that QR code and it'll take you right to the Padlet. Just scan it on your phone and take that little journey of reflection and discussion. And Carol Ann and I will continue to dialogue with that Padlet, and there's places for comments. We can come back to you on questions or comments that you have as well. And for further information, our contact information is down there at the bottom for you as well. So if you want to email us at any time, ask us how we're doing and how our journey of research is going into this topic and these issues. If you have suggestions, collaborations, anything like that, please don't hesitate to contact us and let's have a chat. Let's do some more roundtable discussion and opportunities to really get get us all thinking about universal design for learning and critical thinking. So I thank you so much for the time that you've spent with us. I hope you found it informative. And I thank Carol Ann as well for this incredible contribution that she's provided from that perspective of a school teacher and in classroom practice, which is really vital. So I may have brought the sociological perspective and got you thinking, get your social imagination going and thinking, but Carol Ann really just spins it towards practice. And I think that's that's a good way to really just have a holistic view of how we can tackle these issues in education. So thanks again for joining us, and please be in touch.
Thank
Thanks.
you.